talking about. All right. Okay, so let's go with Kashmir. All right, so let's deal with Kashmir. Let's make this our new big number for us today. Kashmir. All right, so one of the most controversial parts of partition, and there's plenty to be controversial about, right? One of the most controversial aspects of partition is Kashmir. Kashmir is this big gray section up here, okay? So Kashmir is one of the princely states. It's one of the princely states, and it is way up in the Himalayas. Kashmir looks like this, basically. Okay, so it's way up in the Himalayas. These mountains, we're talking like all of these mountains are like over 17,000 feet. That these mountains, like even the small mountains are only like 14,000 feet, the hills, right? So this is like, rooftop of the world kind of stuff in this area, okay? It's sparsely populated. It doesn't have a ton of people, and it's a point of contention for the Indians and the Pakistanis. Okay, the British really decide to screw things up really nicely because during partition, the British basically just say Kashmir can figure it out for themselves. India and Pakistan will figure this out, and then they leave. And so when the British are drawing the line, they basically just leave Kashmir undefined. And the British say, it's okay, the Kashmiris will figure this out on their own. Well, we got a problem, okay? Now, first of all, the population of Kashmir is mostly Muslim. It's a majority Muslim. The population of Kashmir is like 70% Muslim. So if it's like 70% Muslim, what country should it go to? Right.
Pakistan.
It should go to Pakistan, right? All of the other states with 70% Muslims went to Pakistan. So Kashmir should go to Pakistan as well. Here's the trick. The king of Kashmir is a Hindu. And so is the ruling class of Kashmir, the people who have all the money. The rulers are all Hindus. The majority population is Muslims. So the king of Kashmir, he's afraid that he will lose his position and he will lose his money if he becomes part of Pakistan, right? Because Hindus aren't allowed in Pakistan. Pakistan does not have religious freedom. Pakistan is an Islamic republic. Everyone is required to be Muslims, right? And so if Kashmir joins Pakistan, the Hindu king and the Hindu ruling class will lose everything they have. So the Hindu king approaches Nehru in India and he says, if you support me and protect me, I will join India. To which Nehru and the Hindu leaders say, welcome to India, right? They say, yes, welcome to India. So India, then the king turns over everything. India claims 100% of Kashmir. India claims everything. Now, Pakistan also claims 100% of Kashmir, and Pakistan claims it because, as a Muslim state, it should have been Pakistani. So, Kashmir immediately turns into the first Indo-Pakistani War. The first Indo-Pakistani War in 1947. But if you look at my list here, you're going to see that this Kashmir problem is not going away. Okay? Every one of these wars has a Kashmir fight in it. The Indo-Pakistani War of 47, the War of 65, the War of 71, which actually starts in Bangladesh, but as soon as the war starts, fighting breaks out in Kashmir as well. The War of 99, the standoff where they were shooting each other from 01 to 02, another one in 08, border skirmishes, right? We get all these things. The War of 47 breaks out almost instantly, like almost as soon as independence happens, this war breaks out like a month later, right? Over Kashmir. And I want you to understand that this is a war. This is not like a little, argument between these countries. This is like tanks and planes and bombs, and it's a war, right? This is tanks and planes and bombs. We're talking hundreds of thousands of soldiers moving on each other. Okay. The result of the 1947 war is the Indo-Pakistani War of 1947, is that we get something called the line of control. The United Nations negotiates this line, and they negotiate this line here, um, where everything in the blue is India controlled, everything in the green is Pakistan controlled. Okay. And neither the Indians nor the Pakistanis agree to this line. They both think that India claims everything, Pakistan claims everything. Okay. So neither of them agree to this line. So both of them have like tanks and guns and planes and soldiers with guns pointing at each other along the entire line, which means that every single year some dumbass tries to cross the border or something and they start shooting at each other. Like every single year, there has never been a 100% peaceful year in the existence between India and Pakistan. Not once. Every year it has been this way. Okay. Um, okay. Here's the ethnic map down here. Here's the ethnic map, right? So here's where the capital is. The Hindus are in red. So this is the king and his capital group down here. But you'll see very quickly, all of the main population lives through here, and it's all Muslim. Okay. This group of other is mostly Buddhists. They're mostly like Tibetan Buddhists. But this area here has almost nobody in it. It's really, really empty. Very, very empty. These are like super tall mountains that are really isolated from each other. It's mostly Buddhists who live through here. Okay. So Ilha and Tiffany, we'll start with you two. Ilha and Tiffany, why do you think that they're going to fight over this so much? Is this just like ethnic fighting between Indians and Pakistanis? Or is there something else? Why do you think they're fighting so much about it? Ilha and Tiffany, let's start with you guys. I want to let the Indians answer last because I think the Indians might already know. Except for Yash, who doesn't ever want to be asked anything about India. Yeah, so Tiffany, why don't you start us off? What's your instinct here?
I'm not really sure. I always just go straight to like religion, but I feel like that's too obvious here.
Well, religion is a problem, right? I mean, they are killing, 2 million other people for religion, right? So religion is an issue. Ilha, what do you think, man?
I'm not sure. Is it maybe it's like, I don't know. Just like they're all the like previous conflict and they just don't want to like.
So some of it is kind of machismo, right? Some of it is like cultural bias and, cultural hatred, kind of machismo, like showing off who's tougher. Like some of it is that. Like, let's be honest here, right? Some of it is that. Do any of you guys have a real solid theory? Drew, what do you think, man?
Okay, so I would say probably resources. For example, the Saichen Glacier has plenty of fresh water, and both countries are really deprived of that. So it would be only obvious to fight over it. So I believe there would be resources like fresh water in Kashmir that
Yeah.
they would be fighting for.
So right off the bat, so whenever there's a fight that's going to be this big, you have to think to yourself, it's got to be more than just ethnicity, right? There has to be something else going on, oil or gold or something else. In this case, it's the most precious resource, water. Okay, it's the most precious resource, water. Drew, did you look that up? Were you Googling it and looking it up? Or did you just...
No, my mom's a nationalist about the Saichen Glacier.
Mm.
Tells my dad.
Yeah, that's why I didn't want to ask a Hindu right off the bat, because the Hindus oftentimes know. But yeah, so this is the source of a lot of fresh water, particularly the Indus River. Okay, so the Indus River is this deep blue one that's, it's exaggerated here for the picture, right? But it's running right through the middle of Kashmir. Okay, Kashmir is the source of almost 100% of the Pakistani fresh water, and it's also the source of somewhere around 15 to 20% of Indian fresh water. And the Indus River Valley, the Indus River area, this whole area through here, is actually the largest agricultural plain on the planet Earth. And it's the largest agricultural plain on the planet Earth, and all of that water comes through Kashmir. So the Saichen Glacier, Dhruv is correct. It's like right through here. It's the single largest glacier in the world. Well, no, that's not true. It's the largest glacier in the world that's not on Greenland or Antarctica. Okay, so it's the largest glacier in Asia. And it's also the source of something like 20% of the Indus River's water that comes out of this giant glacier, massive, massive glacier. This is a glacier the size of like countries that we're dealing with. It's a glacier the size of like Switzerland, basically, right? And so the Pakistanis can't let India keep this because then India controls all of Pakistan's water and they could just put a dam on it and screw the Pakistanis. But the Indians can't let the Pakistanis have it because the Pakistanis could also put a dam on it and screw like 6 states of India. Right? So India won't starve overall, but those areas, including the capital city of Delhi, would. Right? So this is why they fight over it. This is why they can't agree. This is the single biggest reason is water. Right? There is machismo, there is, posturing, there is that stuff involved as well, but the water is the big one. Okay? Let's talk China. Because on my map here, the yellow section is China. All right, so in the beginning, China's not part of this, right? China's in like year 29 of their civil war, and so they're busy. So they're not part of this in the beginning. But by the time we get up into 1965, China does become part of it. And China takes over Aksai Chin. They take Shaksgam and Aksai Chin. They take both of these sections. And what they do, basically, is they approach Pakistan about it. Pakistan says, we will give you those yellow sections of the map in exchange for Chinese weapons, money, and political support. And so China recognizes that Pakistan controls everything. China stands against India and does that. Now, China chooses this section over here that has nothing to do with water, but what it does have is the only canyons in the entire area where you can run a road into Tibet. So most of these mountains are so tall and so steep that you can't run roads through them, right? Like you end up like packing things on yaks and donkeys and things, right? And this is one of the only areas of the entire region that is flat enough and wide enough to make a road. And so China needs a road in order to connect Xinjiang, right here, in order to connect Xinjiang and Tibet, right? Michael, you don't like my pronunciation? How am I supposed to say it?
It's fine for. Okay, yeah, you just say Xinjiang.
Xinjiang?
Yeah,
Xinjiang? All right.
that's better.
So,
Yeah.
so Xinjiang is it's the western state of China. It's like the Muslim state of China that they're trying to take over and they're trying to, turn into China, basically, right? It's the frontier. So Tibet is the area over here and Xinjiang is over here, and they're trying to take over those 2 areas. Okay? A little bit of light genocide going on, a little bit of light genocide and ethnic cleansing going on, but this is what China needs a road. So let's be clear. India today claims the blue, the green, and the yellow sections. Pakistan only claims the green and the blue sections, and China only claims the yellow sections. Does that make sense? And here we are today. Okay, this fight is basically this fight. Like what I've told you now basically will carry you all the way up to, you know, the 2019 standoff last year where they were shooting each other last year, right? It'll carry you all the way to the modern day because it's basically all one extension of the same argument. Ooh, there's one thing I forgot. Okay, there's one thing I forgot. Here we go. In the 1990s, this fight started to change. It started to change a little bit. India has a massive, massive army here, a much, much larger army, right? India has like 700,000 troops, something like that. Pakistan can't keep up, right? It just can't keep up with that army. And so what Pakistan started doing was supporting terrorist groups living in Kashmir. So they started supporting terrorist groups living in Kashmir, and those terrorist groups started blowing things up. And starting in about the mid 90s, we're going to get something blowing up in Kashmir basically every week. Like terrorists just blowing up different things basically every week. Starting in the mid 2000s, those Kashmiri terrorists will start blowing things up in India itself. Okay? So in like 03, they blow up the Parliament building in Delhi. They blow up the Parliament building in Delhi, right? And in 05, they blow up a hotel in Mumbai and they kill 400 people. Right? And if you know your Indian geography, Mumbai is like down here, right? Kashmir is way up at the top here, right? Mumbai is down here, nowhere near Kashmir. Okay, so this is Pakistan has begun exporting terrorism across India, and there you go. That's the big change, which has been the source of a lot of the recent violence. A lot of these recent violence are because Indians are claiming that Pakistanis are fueling terrorism, and they are. So they are, yeah. Okay. Do you guys have questions about Kashmir or anything like that? All right. I want to draw your attention to the discussion this week. Come on, dummy. All right. So the discussion this week, it's a big one. It's a big one. If you want to get a paper copy of it, you can come into my class. I made a whole bunch of paper copies. But here's the document. It's 83 pages long. Okay, so it's a big one. It's a big one. But we're going to do it over the course of 2 weeks. So I don't expect you to have it all done in one day. Put this in your notes because as you're reading through it, I want you to look for this, okay? This book is, it's chapter 1 out of this book right here, which is called The Election Commission of India. And the entire book is basically about the development of Indian elections, okay? And what I want you to put in the notes here is that the book is developing, the chapter of the book is developing two parallel ideas about democracy. And these two parallel ideas are going to carry us through, you know, the decades as we move to the modern day. The chapter I gave you is the chapter on the first election. Come on, dummy. There we go. Okay. It's the chapter on the first election, the first general elections in 1951. Okay. India gets its independence in 57. It writes its constitution in 50, and then it has its first election in 51 just a few months later. Okay. This first election, as you're going to read through here, you're going to find that India's first election is kind of a mess, right? It's like a hot mess. India is a big, complicated place. It's a big, complicated place, and there's a lot of going on. There's a lot of languages, a lot of people, a lot of, different things going on, and it's a mess. So this book is focusing on two things. The first parallel, I want you to think of these as two giant parallels, and each of them contain within them smaller ideas. Okay. The first parallel is the architecture of democracy. This means the nuts and bolts of how democracy works, right? What does your ballot look like? Where's the polling station? Who gets to vote? Who gets to run for office? What does a party need to do to be on the ballot? Who gets to pay for it, right? All that kind of stuff. Okay, that's this first one. That is difficult to do in India, right? It's difficult in any country, but India particularly is pretty hard to do this. But it's easier than the second parallel. The second parallel is a culture of democracy. You have to get the people of India, everybody, from the poorest, untouchable person all the way to the richest guy, right? You have to get them all to believe in democracy. They have to think democratically. They have to want democratic solutions. They have to believe in democratic solutions. They have to believe in the government. India has never been a democracy before this. And so Indians don't really have a concept of what democracy is. This is something that is very, very difficult to do. Americans have this built into us for 250 years, right? If you read like psychology books and sociology books about this, children in the United States, like we're talking like 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds in nursery school, right? In like preschool, they will use democratic solutions in the classroom, right? Like you'll see this, they do studies of this where kids will be like 5 years old and they'll vote on who gets the toy, or they'll vote on who gets to be allowed into their team, or vote on this kind of stuff. And that's because Americans have democracy so deeply ingrained in our brains and our thought patterns that our children already think democratically when they're like 4. Indians don't have that, at least not in 1951. Right? And so you have to build that into them. What happens to a country that builds the architecture but doesn't build the culture? What's going to happen to that country? Wentao, what do you think will happen to that country?
It's
Raul,
not
what do
going to
you think?
last very long.
It's not going to last very long. Why not?
Because people probably just won't accept the architecture.
Yeah, the architecture doesn't mean anything if you don't have the belief, right? Can you guys think of a really good real world example of a country that built the architecture but didn't build the culture? We have a bunch of really good real world examples. I have a really good one for you. I'll give you in a second. But do you guys have an idea? Raul, you look like you have an idea. No, Raul's like, no. Yash, this isn't a question about India. So what do you want? What are you thinking, Yash?
I'm not too sure.
Okay, I'm going to give you the best example I can think of is Russia in the 1990s. After the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, they build the architecture for democracy, and Russia holds its first democratic elections in like 1993, 93, maybe 94. But they hold their first democratic elections in the early 90s, but they didn't have any kind of culture for democracy. Russians didn't know what democracy was. They know what it is like in a textbook definition sense of the word, but they don't like feel it in their soul. The Russians have always been told what to do. They've always lived with an authoritarian government. And so when that government says go and vote, they go and do it because they're used to being told what to do. But it doesn't mean anything to them. The result is that in 2 elections, the Russian government ceases to be a democracy and it becomes an autocracy again. Right? Vladimir Putin won his election with 98% of the vote. 98%, let it sink in for just a moment here. 98% of Russians voted for him. Does that sound like there's any way that that's a legitimate number? right? If I were to tell you that the American president, you know, if I come at you in 2024 and I tell you the election of 2024, the American president won 98% of the vote, right? What would you immediately say about that election?
Election fraud.
Yeah, right? Is there any American in the country who would believe that number? Right? When is the last time 98% of Americans agreed on anything? You can't even get 98% of Americans to agree that coronavirus is bad or that coronavirus is real. The virus that's killing us is not real. You can't get 98% of us to believe that, right? You can't even get a 2/3 majority of the country to believe that our election happened, right? You can't get 98% of the people to agree that a violent insurrection in the government trying to assassinate Congress is bad, right? Like Americans don't agree on anything. The best you're going to get is like 55% agreement, right? On basically anything. Okay. The Indian leaders, Nehru, Patel, a bunch of these other guys, they aren't stupid. They know this. They know that India needs the architecture, but maybe more importantly, India needs the culture. Okay. So this chapter is building both. It's talking about building both. And as you read through it, I want you to look for both. I want you to look for both aspects of those things. Okay? Because they're both equally important. If I have the culture with no architecture, then I have a rebellion. If I have the architecture with no culture, then I have like a military dictatorship. Okay? You got to have both. Right? This is why Pakistan is not a democracy. They built the architecture, but they never got the culture. Right? This is why the military has overthrown the Pakistani government like 4 or 5 times now. And that's why. Right? On the surface, Pakistan votes, but their votes don't actually mean anything. Right? In India, votes matter and parties matter and elections matter. Cool? All right. You guys look extra bored, so I'm going to go ahead and stop. You look extra bored. Tiffany looks like she's going to go to sleep. I appreciate that, Tiff. Thanks. All right. So, all right. Do you guys have any questions or anything before we go?
So for discussion, what are the? I kind of read it and I don't understand the exact like numbers for a required responses and stuff.
Yeah. So I want to, more than a lot of other discussions, a lot of the discussions have a problem where people will just make responses and then not read the responses, not really care, right? And so it ends up not being a conversation. It ends up being a bunch of people who are just like checking a box to get credit. I want this one to be a conversation, right? So if Michael, you make a post and then Yash responds to it, I want you to respond at least twice on your own post, in addition to responding at least twice on someone else's post. Right? Because I want you to respond to someone else's thing. Right? So Mike makes the post, Yash asks a question about it, Mike gives an answer, Yash gives a different answer, right? Maybe Raul gets in on it, Mike gets another one, Tiffany gets in on it, right? Like I want it to be an actual discussion. That's what I'm trying to, that's the goal of the way I have the points divided up. Does that make sense, Mike?
So do we have, so the 2 posts thing, is it, yeah, it also says there's 3 responses. So it'd be 2 posts for 3 classmates.
Let me double check. Let me make sure my numbers are correct, because you're making me think I made it weirder than it is.
Maybe I'm just misreading stuff.
No, let me double check. Okay. You guys are all blocking my screen. So you'll make 2 posts, right? So I want you to identify 2 topics, right? So 2 posts, and then you'll make 2 responses to someone else's post, right? 2 responses to someone else's post, and then 2 responses to your own posts. Oh, I see what it is, because it's 3 and 3. Yeah, okay. All right. So 3 responses to other people's posts, and then 3 to your own. Does that make sense?
So
A total of 6 responses. 3, so like Mike, you would have your post, 3 of your own responses on your own post, and then 3 responses on like Yash or Ilha's post or something like that. Cool? Yeah. I want you to try to keep the conversation going on your post as much as possible. I'm going to be looking to see who can do that. Part of that is you have to be early, right? The earlier you are, the more responses you get. People who post at the very last minute usually don't get any responses, in which case you are prohibited from getting points if you do that. See what I'm saying? In order for you to get responses on your post needs to be pretty early. That's what I'm trying to, that's how I'm trying to force your behavior. Okay, Raul, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so I did have a question about the test. Should I ask it right now?
Sure, yeah, it's up to you.
Well, I was just wanting to know if you would be able to go over my test with me and just point out the major issues in
Okay.
my
I can-
responses.
I can do that with you individually after everyone gets off. That's not a problem. Yeah. Yeah, overall, the test was pretty good. Overall, you guys were pretty good. We had, I think 3 students got 100% on the test. And so that was, you know, the first time this whole year that people got 100% on the test. I think it was Tyler Tron got 100%, Cassidy Adams, and Rashmin Tariq. They all got 100%. They were good, but a lot of other people got almost 100% as well. So nicely done. Good job. All right, do you guys, other than Raul, do you guys have any other issues or problems or comments? Going once, going twice? Okay, so Raul, you stay on. I'll pull up your test real quick. Everyone else, you guys are free to go.